so on. It might progress to that, but there should at the very least be, at the very minimum, be an ability for the citizens to be able to elect who they want to govern them, and to be able to vote, right? That power to vote, that power to express your voice is inherent in democracy, and tyranny obviously wants to rob the citizens of their power to vote, of their power to decide. And the point is, why would tyrants want to do that? You preserve power if you dominate, abuse the citizens, right? The more you dominate, the more you abuse the citizenry, is the more you are able to preserve that power you have, because you know they want to vote you out, right? So instead of allowing you the opportunity to vote me out, I'm going to become a tyrant. I'm going to use my power, I'm going to use the implements of my power to oppress, subjugate the population, and preserve that sense of power. This becomes problematic, though, as we've seen in a cascade of revolts, citizen revolts, from many young people. Thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of young people throughout the Middle East are revolting against that tyranny. So there is an ongoing, and we are in the midst of an ongoing global revolution, not just within politics and policy. We're going through ideological revolution. We're going through educational revolution. We're going through technological revolution. We are in the midst, right now, we are in the midst of global transformation. And it will be interesting to see what's on the other side of that. So, democratic peace theory, watch those videos, hopefully that'll help. The process, the first bullet point, the process of creating a more democratic world requires a generational approach, right? We have to think of it in terms of a timeline, right? If the goal where we're headed towards is democracy, right? If where we're headed is democracy, and here's where we are today, then the ability to arrive at this state of affairs, right? The process of creating a more democratic world, right? And specifically, I'll put democratic world, D-M-O-C-R-E, democratic world. If we're trying to look at attaining a democratic world, the first thing that we have to recognize, it's going to take, it's a generational approach, right? It's a generational approach. It's something that will take many generations to arrive at, right? This is the goal. This is the end game, right? So if you think of it in terms of where we're headed towards, or what we're attempting to accomplish, we're attempting to accomplish a democratic world, right? The point, however, is a recognition that the attempt to get there requires a generational. It requires a generational approach, right? Many different generations, many different movements will be needed to get us to this state of affairs. And the question becomes, why? Right? Why is it important? Why is it important that we arrive at a democratic world? The first thing to recognize in answering this question of why, and it's very important to recognize this, is that the first sort of misconception that you have to play devil's advocate, right? Imagine that you live in a culture where it is not democratic, right? So we need to convince that individual why should you be democratic, right? So obviously I'm not now, sort of preaching to the choir, preaching to people who already believe in democracy. That's not education, right? Education is the ability to at least introduce the idea and allow the individual to make their own decision based on information whether or not democracy is appealing. The point of arriving at a democratic world is that citizens have an opportunity to have their voice be heard, right? There's an opportunity to be heard in a democratic world, right? So one of the benefits is that there's an opportunity to be heard. We live in an information age. This is the information age, and there will only be more information as the age progresses. There's going to be such a preponderance of information out there that for individuals who can't access and don't have an ability to contribute to that information, eventually they're going to be lost. because there will be so many other voices being heard. This is why people get upset, because they feel that they want to say something and there isn't a platform for them to say something, because tyrants are separating them from the ability to gain and transmit and contribute to information, right? So why is a democratic world desirable? Why is it the end game? Why are we willing to take this generational approach to get to a democratic world? Because there's opportunity in being heard, right? There's opportunity in being heard. The second point with respect to attempting to invest, if you will, everything you have, all chips on increasing a democratic world, is that the more you increase a democratic world, since we've seen through the process of democratic peace theory, which I'll just abbreviate democratic peace theory, DPT, right? Democratic peace theory, if democratic peace theory is the instrument that is being used to get us to the next line, right? So if that's the step that's going to help us get to the next line, then we recognize, once we end this process, once we arrive at a state, democratic peace theory has already shown us that democracies don't fight against each other. So it seems to be the case is if we have a democratic world, we should have a much more peaceful world, right? I am not a utopist. I will never, neither publicly or privately, admit that I believe we can live ever in a state of total kumbaya harmony. You're not going to get that speech from me, because I don't believe it's going to happen. I'm never going to be out of a job, unfortunately, right? Because conflict is inherent in human existence. However, the point is, democratic peace theory suggests that democracies don't war against each other. They use other means of mitigating their tensions than resorting to battle. If we arrive at a state where the world is considered democratic, then it must be that this is the most peaceful instantiation of the world. The world couldn't possibly be more peaceful than it is, right? So we will have we will approach rather, I'm a conflict resolutionist. This is what I do, and part of conflict resolution, a huge part of what I do is peace theory, right? And later in my YouTube series, somewhere down the road, I'm going to do a ridiculously overdone sort of peace discourse, because I write a lot about peace, I study peace a lot, and eventually I'll prepare notes, but I want to come proper on my peace theory, my peace discourse lecture, and have it like, 50-hour long lecture, something like ridiculous. But we approach global peace. I'm not going to say that this state of affairs can ever be attained. However, if you think about it, democracies don't war with each other. More nations and more intrastate groups are approaching and understand the viability of democracy. Then it should be the case that the globe becomes more democratic. If the globe becomes more democratic, then the globe becomes more peaceful. The third thing to recognize with respect to democracy is that this idea of democracy is not an American concept, right? It's not an American concept. The idea of democracy is, it's misinformed, and people will say, oh, it's, American democracy or American style. No, the idea of democracy is a sense in which there is an instrument, an ability in which an individual can attain functional purpose within their state. The state, right? The state has an instrument, right? The state has an instrument where an individual may be able to contribute to the overall power of the state, right? So that power is dispersed from the top down, right? If you think of it like this, and a very, very simple example so that you understand, because this idea is actually extremely complex. If you think of it, little kids need energy to survive, right? You need energy to survive, and you want to make sure that your child is healthy. So what do? You give your child a plate, and you give your child, if you use a fork when you eat, and spoons, utensils when you eat. You give the child